Manager. Next slide, please. We'll start off with a federal update. The President released his proposed FY23 budget in late March. And since then, the House and Senate Appropriations subcommittees have started hearings on that budget and on other matters related to the budget. And we do expect them to report out their budget bills in June or July, which you could have some votes on some of the budget bills in the late July timeframe. Along with that, I want to make sure you all are aware that the city did submit 2 earmark requests to Congresswoman Adams for implementation of some key city strategic priorities. First, under your Safe Charlotte umbrella, the Cure Violence implementation. We did receive a grant for fiscal year 2022, and we'd be seeking a second one to help with the continuation of the program. In the area of affordable housing, we have requested an earmark to help with the construction of 88 low and moderate income housing units. Next slide, please. Bipartisan infrastructure law. A couple things to report today. Some of this may look familiar to you. We're still in the process of preparing for submittal 2 grants, one for the MEGA program for the University City Rail Safety and Street Connectivity, and the second for the low or no emissions vehicle program that CATS will be submitting. And again, those due dates are May 23rd and May 31. And also this morning, as soon as we got into work, a notice of funding opportunity was sent from the Federal Highway Administration for the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. And this is where local governments like counties, cities, towns, et cetera, and even metropolitan planning organizations can submit grant applications to implement or develop Vision Zero plans, which is a topic, a fairly continuous topic of the City Safe Communities and Transportation Planning Committee for some time. And the great thing about this grant program, it's about $1 billion per year, which is good, but also is that it's limited to metropolitan planning organizations and local governments. State governments, for example, are not allowed to compete for this. The thought was that you need to have a few programs like this exclusively for political subdivisions of states. And finally, we did report before that 3 grant applications have already been submitted for the airport terminal program and 2 raise grants. Next slide, please. Competition and innovation. We had talked a little bit before about a couple of bills that have passed, one in the House, one in the Senate, both called the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act of 2021. And while they have the same title, the bills are quite different. What the bills do, they boost funding for the semiconductor industry and scientific research and address human rights issues in China, trade programs, and supply chains. But one of the big key differences is that the House version of the bill includes $1.2 billion for historically black colleges and universities to expand their research, educational, and innovation capabilities. And Congresswoman Adams of Charlotte was the primary person who got that into the House bill. The conference committee process, again, has been formally initiated. And this is one where there's some other issues with the bill that will probably force this conference committee to be working for the next several months. Next slide, please. Part of your legislative agenda addresses immigration reform. A bipartisan group of senators has resumed efforts to reform the U.S. immigration system, and those members include Senator Tillis from North Carolina and Republican Senator Cornyn from Texas and Democratic Senators Durbin and Padilla from Illinois and California, respectively. Their challenge is going to be to identify issues where 60 votes in the Senate could be secured. As you all may recall, a few months ago, actually over the last several months, immigration advocates and supporters in the House of Representatives did try to get into the Build Back Better bill immigration provisions. However, because that is using a process to speed legislation through the Senate, it's called budget reconciliation. It had to meet certain requirements, that it was related to the budget. And the finding of the Senate parliamentarian was that it was not related to the budget. So this group of senators is trying to look for areas, issue areas where they would actually need to have 60 votes. And specifically, those issues where you can get those 60 votes in the Senate. And we'll be watching that over the next several months. In fact, all of these issues we'll be watching. And next steps, we have Intergovernmental Relations Committee next month on June 20th. And again, we're expecting the appropriations subcommittees to report out their budget recommendations starting in late June and probably going into July. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you. I think we reported out a couple months ago or a month or so ago that when we visited Senator Tillis's office, we had a pretty robust conversation about immigration reform and their advocacy for something moving forward. So it's not a surprise, but it's a good to see him in his office in the center of that work. So I think we should definitely keep our eyes and ears tuned that way. I would say one thing I would mention, I would like us to keep a lookout. I just heard something anecdotally this morning that the Biden administration was announcing new rules and spending priorities with cities and localities, municipalities that have made some of the policy changes that we've made that relate to zoning districts and changes that we're making there. So I don't know if you've heard anything in that realm, Dana, but let's keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think I received something this morning from our sources called a housing action plan, and I have not had a chance to review that, but I will, and in fact, I'll probably just go ahead and send it out to the committee to take a look at as well. But thank you I appreciate you bringing that up, because I know that the zoning issue has been something you have brought up a few times, and also that was part of previous legislation requested by the president.
Yes, and I think it relates to more funding for the building of affordable housing. So that is, of course, also on our legislative agenda. So it's good to see the hard work of council getting attention. With that said, I see Ms. Eisel has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dana, thanks for the presentation. First, I want to just say I'm really, really pleased to see bipartisan work on immigration reform. It's way overdue, and that's mostly because nobody wanted to work in a bipartisan manner. So kudos to those, our senators who are willing to do that. I appreciate that. Secondly, Representative Adams just posted recently that she's hoping that that Charlotte will apply for the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program, which is part of the infrastructure bill. And I apologize if you just mentioned that. I was switching over devices. Are we applying for a grant for that under that particular program?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, that notice of funding opportunity came out this morning, and we would have to be talking with probably the Department of Transportation, CDOT, about that one in particular, and perhaps even the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or what we know as CARTPO. So we will take a look at that, try to get it out there. There's quite a bit of time to submit proposals. I think September 15th is the due date, which is about 4 months from now. So there is some time there to get some things going. And we found too, I'll just say this, I I think I'm okay to say this, but Congresswoman Adams and all the members of the delegation have been great about trying to get us to apply for grants. We had that a couple months ago. We were up in D.C. I think we had a lot of encouragement from all the offices to get grant applications in. So we will follow up on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I keep hearing from federal representatives that there's so much money up there. So we want to make sure that we get our share of it in Charlotte. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, can I just note for the record that Mr. Driggs is signed on to the meeting?
Thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Driggs. Mr. Driggs or Mr. Dune, do you have any questions or comments on this topic? I thank you very much. We could move on.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In committee, the next is the state legislative update. And for this one, I will be going through it. And at any time, if Mr. Freeman from KTS Strategies would like to provide some information, I would be more than glad to let him speak. So the first slide, the short session, it's 2 days away, May 18th at 12 noon, high noon, that they will gavel in. And everything we've heard from the leadership leading up to now is that they want to adjourn by July 1. And I know we hear that every year, but certainly this is a year that probably they will be adjourning by that time because of the elections that are coming up. A lot of them are running in new districts, and there's other reasons as well. Primary issues this year, appropriations. Typically, the General Assembly likes to pass an amended budget for new things that have come up. They also have technical adjustments to make. There's always corrections and other issues like that that need to be made. Medical cannabis could be an issue this year, along with Medicaid expansion. In fact, I will say is on a Medicaid expansion that there was a interim committee that was set up to take a look at this issue that started meeting in April. Next slide, please. One of the important things for the short session is that when you start in May, they always are provided, the members are provided a general fund revenue forecast or an update to the forecast that underpinned the budget that was passed last year by them. And right now, they're expecting general fund revenues in the current fiscal year to increase by like $4.24 billion compared to what they had budgeted. That is, I'll say it again, the general fund revenues in this current fiscal year are projected to surpass revenue estimates that are in the budget bill they passed by $4.24 million just in this fiscal year. And the surplus amount for FY23 is projected to be $1.9 billion. And the main revenue sources of the state have shown some very, very strong growth. Personal income taxes, sales and use tax, and corporate income tax. I think the figure for those three sources of revenue as a percentage of the general fund budget is around 80%. So that looks very good for the fund right now. But looking ahead, the revenue forecast did cite that inflation, if it continues to increase, that could be an issue because that'll take a bite out of what people can spend at the stores. And also the potential for a recession. They're watching that one very, very carefully. And certainly we none of us hope that inflation continues or that we have a recession. Next slide, please. They also received a revenue report for the transportation funds, in particular the Highway Trust Fund and the Highway Fund. And over the next 2 years, they should have a pretty healthy surplus of about $431 million. And the reason is that motor fuel taxes, tax and highway use tax collections are higher. And energy prices, the forecast expects to remain high through next year. And just as, so you know, the Highway Trust Fund, that fund primarily covers major construction projects. In the highway fund, it covers road and bridge maintenance, state maintenance assistance program, Powell bill distributions, et cetera. And that's basically the highway fund is your operating fund for NCDOT. And with that, since we met with our delegation on April 28th, the delegation has put in budget request for this year, and they put these 6 into the governor's office for consideration for his proposed FY23 budget amendments. Now, those amendments were, his proposed FY23 budget was released last week, and folks are checking for us to see whether these are going to be in that request or not. And the first one is to restore the Powell bill funding to statutory levels, as we discussed. And then there are 5 relatively small earmark requests. All of them relate to strategic priorities of the city. The first 2 have to do with Safe Charlotte, the civilian crisis response team, and funding for community violence interruption. Then we have 2 requests for the Strategic Energy Action Plan, the charging infrastructure for the public, and charging stations for the public safety fleet. And then the last one, it has to do with affordable housing and eviction prevention community collaborative funding for that effort. And next slide, please. And again, our short session begins in 2 days. And then we have we have one event at least. The League of Municipalities will hold its town and state dinner on Wednesday, June 1. That would be a reception in the late afternoon and then a dinner. And then, of course, next month, we also have our Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting on June 20th. And again, the date targeted for adjournment by the leadership, and that should be really a adjournment of July 1 for the short session. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. It's good to see the Powell bill funding being requested, and thank you for checking up on that. I saw Mr. Driggs had his hand up first, and then Ms. Eisel.
Actually, it looked to me like Ms. Eisel was first. Go for it.
I don't get worked up about those things. Dana, could you go back to the transportation slide? Mm-hmm. What I'm wondering, I'm glad to see that there's a surplus. And I'm wondering if there has been any discussion about covering the shortfalls in the STIP, because, the last I heard, NCDOT was talking about regions having to take out projects. Mm-hmm. Is there any more discussion about that right now?
Yes, in the governor's budget proposal for the Highway Trust Fund, which of course is the one where the STIP projects are funded through, the portion of the surplus and revenues, or projected surplus for the Highway Trust Fund would be going in there to backfill the Highway Trust Fund. And I don't recall offhand what the total amount is. The amount, I have a cumulative amount there for both funds, but the cut of revenue, the cut of revenue for the Highway Trust Fund is a different percentage than it is for the Highway Fund. So I don't have that with you, but it would go in there to help backfill issues with those projects.
Okay, but there isn't, that doesn't cover the short fill. Is there any discussion in using some of that, the overall state surplus, to catch up on some of those transportation projects?
There was discussion a few months ago about looking at the state's general fund sales and use tax revenues. There is a part of those sales and use tax revenues that relate to transportation-related purchases that we all make from time to time, like we go to the auto parts store to buy whatever it is there, and those revenues from that would go to the Highway Trust Fund. And that was a recommendation of the committee that you served on Mayor Pro Tem, the NC First Commission. And that would have to be legislated by the General Assembly. And
Okay.
I can't remember, don't recall immediately what amount of new funding that would bring to the Highway Trust Fund, but I'd be glad to get that for you all and send it to you after this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I had pretty much the same question. I'm wondering what legislative steps would it take? I mean, we have this situation where Powell bill money is used, and it always depends on, how much of that there is, but now they're looking at this $6 billion in surplus, and meanwhile, the road construction program, it gets deeper and deeper in the hole. This isn't just a simple budget decision, right? They would have to actually pass a law or make a change in order to be able to access general fund money for the Highway Trust Fund.
You are correct, Mr. Driggs. They would have to pass legislation calling for that. In fact, they would also have to pass legislation appropriating a higher amount of funding for NCDOT to use the surplus in the transportation revenues for this year and next.
Right. So I'm just wondering what kind of barriers there would be to that. I mean, they have something like $4 billion in their rainy day fund right now, don't they?
I believe that is the correct figure, yes. It's around that much. But yeah, there's always been a tension there about using state general fund resources for the transportation fund for a lot of different reasons. When about 10, 12 years ago, that legislation, there were some changes made to what the transportation funds could be used for. One of the uses they took out was supporting the highway patrol with transportation revenues. That's now funded entirely through the general fund. So there's a lot of people who remember that, and they try to keep a strict segregation between those sets of revenues.
The other question I had was, why is our judiciary so underfunded in the midst of all of this plenty?
Can you repeat your question, Mr. Driggs?
Why is the judiciary so underfunded in the midst of all of this plenty?
Oh, okay. The judiciary. Yeah, that's a
Great question.
That's a very good question. And it goes well beyond policy, I believe. And it's a really thought-provoking question. And what I can tell you is that the judiciary depends a lot upon fees, and that trying to wean a group like that off of fees could be pretty expensive. So that it could be an issue like that. But I don't know if Mr. Freeman would like to add in with any additional thoughts he has on that question.
The dynamics of the judiciary's funding is about as complex a policy topic as they can come across there.
But at some point, you reach a level of absurdity, right? I mean, we've got backlogs in the courts. The district attorney office is underfunded. The county is sort of squeezed to step up, and meanwhile, they're just piling up the cash at the state level. Seems to me it would make sense to make a little noise, because that's an issue that affects us. It's a perfectly legitimate priority for us to discuss with them, and at the same time, it is of significance to the state that we have, a functioning judiciary. And frankly, from a lot of the evidence I've heard, we don't. People keep getting kicked out again, and repeat offenders. So it would be nice if we had a more orderly process, obviously equitable, but not dysfunctional as it is now.
Yeah, so I would suggest that this could be an area that the council may want to consider a legislative request on. This would be a true intergovernmental type of request because, of course, the city doesn't get any direct funding to support the judiciary. But I know
We do actually.
we do.
Yeah. we still have money in our budget that goes to the, to pay, I believe, at least half a position of an ADA that goes back to 2008.
Well, and I do believe that we do put some money for a position in the public defender's office as well. But either way, I think if we had a committee or a council had that desire to come up with an appropriate legislative request, that could probably give staff better guidance on what to look for and how to navigate this. This is something that Mr. Bakari and I have met over the years with the district attorney, members of the district court to discuss ideas like this. So I think there is an appetite. I'd be willing to push that forward if the committee would like to go that route.
Mr. Chairman, I think the point is we can argue that regardless of what we do or don't fund, we have a legitimate interest through our responsibility for the police department and the connection of the police department, the activity of the police department with the courts and the justice system. I think we have standing to lodge the request that appropriate funding, because we're talking about relatively small amounts. I think the whole budget for the district attorney's office is something like $10 or $12 million. So you could lose another $5 million in the billions and never see them again. Anyway, I think it is something to pursue.
I completely agree, and it's something that I think we should, we should maybe highlight this in our committee report out next month. Ms. Isold, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, this goes back to the work we did with Neighbors for a Safer Charlotte in 2008. One thing I want to confirm is that at one point, the fees from the court system were going into the general fund, and there was legislation proposed that said, stop putting it into the general fund, leave it in the court system. Nelson, maybe you know, I don't know if that legislation ever passed, but that was, a number of years. That was an area of a recommendation that had been made from the Mecklenburg County Criminal Justice Task Force in 2008. But there's a lot of, we did put money into the district attorney's office, and there were recommendations that, frankly, if you go back and look at that report, are still valid. And I think that that's an area to look at. But I would like to confirm if, in fact, the fees from the court system go to the general fund.
Mr. Chairman, it might be that a good idea would be to have, in your report out to full council, a suggestion that this committee consider, and that we would then be briefed, because we don't want to go barging in like a bull in a china shop. We need to understand the constraints or what the reasons are that they don't do more right now. And then if we make a request, do so in a way that's informed and sensitive to context. So I think before we actually just create that request, there would need to be some work done by this committee in order for the request to have any chance of success.
I absolutely agree. Again, just another anecdote. For instance, meeting with the district attorney, one of the lowest hanging fruits that he saw was the digitization of records for cases, which is something that I know CMPD would probably welcome, because there are a lot of cases that get prolonged when you go down to often see these boxes of evidence that by law they have to keep and they can't digitize, which makes it creates so many slowdowns and potential for cases to become mishandled at points in time. So to your point, there are many different places I think we could leverage. We need to do that due diligence, as you said. But I wanted to give Mr. Freeman, I think he was about to chime in to respond to Ms. Isold's request.
Only that to drag back that actual legislative history would take more than a cursory Google search while we're on here. I'd want to go back and get you the exact numbers and when that legislation was proposed.
Right, that's why I'm saying maybe do some research, do some work on this, assuming the council agrees that we start to look into this and then have it, in line for a future meeting of this committee. I can tell you that that issue you just mentioned, Mr. Chairman, was something I discussed with Peter Gilchrist 12 or 15 years ago. We have been stuck in this medieval system of record keeping. And that's why I bring it up again. I look at these billions accruing and think, well, really, this ought to be the time we should be able to do this. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we definitely have an item to highlight, and to bring back to the full council. So thank you all for that discussion. If there, Mr. Newton, unless you have anything else, should we move on? All right, we can move on. Mr. Fenton.
Mr. Chairman, that completes the state legislative update. And I appreciate it sounds like it's direction from the committee to make a request of the city council to have this issue referred back to the IRC for further work.
I think that's what I heard as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next item is an update on functional consolidation.
Thank you, and I'll take this on. So we do have an update on this. After our last meeting, I think the last time we updated the committee, we made a communication to Chairman Jarrell and his board to come and update their intergovernmental committee on our discussions and our requests to kind of get to the starting line on an intergovernmental approach or a consolidated approach to policymaking. Mr. Bakari and I were able to join that meeting a couple of weeks ago. Was it two Mondays ago? 2 Wednesdays ago, I do believe.
It was on May 4th.
May 4th. And I think we had a very good discussion. We were able to bring some clarifications to the committee members as well as county staff as to the kind of evolution of our conversations and what we've been talking about on council and in our committee. I think the biggest takeaway that we got was the committee was very warm to the idea of figuring out a consolidated approach to policy making. They like the reference to consolidated approaches and to figure out how to make a consolidated approach. So right now, I think we are all kind of we've done our part. It is going to be up to them to figure out how they kind of push forward on a process if they so wish. So they have kind of decided to take on the conversation, and they will update us as they kind of go through their county process. Mr. Fenton, you think I missed anything or?
No, sir. I think you got it all there. And just to clarify, I think that the county's Intergovernmental Relations Committee, I think what I heard was that they would have to meet on this and then make a recommendation to their board. I don't know when they're meeting. They're not like us. They don't have like a set meeting schedule. But certainly it sounds like they will be discussing this at their next meeting.
Thank you. That is what I heard as well. Mr. Driggs, so you have a question.
So you used the word policy making. Is that our word or their word?
That was both ours and their words. That was the feedback that we got from the county commissioners. Those are the words that they used.
So I just, I pointed out before the kind of larger context. We don't want a backlash from certain people to stop the progress. So we might talk about consolidating activities, for example, or policymaking sounds, far-reaching. So I think we need to be a little sensitive in this context in order to get the best possible outcome.
Absolutely. And we were definitely very sensitive to explain ourselves and explain the trajectory of these conversations that we've been having in our body here at the city. And like I said, I was very relieved to hear some of the words that they were using in talking about this. But to your point, at this point in time, now we're kind of up to their processes. Like you said, there's a very widespread of ways that we could potentially move forward. And I think that's something that they're going to, like I said, as they go through their processes, they're going to decide if they want to move forward, how broad that spread remains.
So I think that's good that there will be an initiative from them alongside our overture, so that nobody can say, hey, you guys are trying to do something that you didn't talk about with us. So I think we're in a good position. Look forward to hearing what they do next. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eisel or Mr. Newton. Any questions or concerns about that?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Fenton or Mr. Cagle. I think does that complete our agenda?
Yes, sir.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Thank you, guys. And remember, tomorrow is election day. Everybody go out and vote.
Oh, you got my vote. Don't worry about it.
Thank you, committee.